How many of you have had a slip and fall or a defect on your property that you've gotten sued?
Not that I
No, I know 2 of them are active right now. Premises liability is also often referred to as landowner liability. Now, there are other types of defects and problems that you can run into that don't actually fit under premises liability. That's why we more often call it landowner liability, because it actually refers to where you physically, where the county lives. The fire station, the county courthouse, county attorney's office, and it includes the sidewalks in between. So slip and falls, defects, latent conditions, inadequate maintenance, and there's also a new area of this law coming up, inadequate security. It's going to be fun. So let's talk about primarily slip and falls for landowner liability. And I know I keep walking out of Herbie's camera range, but it's hard for me to do that. I did some photographs, and many of you will recognize some of that, and feel free to ask questions. But landowner liability or premises liability is actually a legal concept that's been created by the courts. It originally derived from what's called the restatement of torts. But the courts are the ones that have created now this whole area of law that we refer to as premises liability. And there's 2 types. There's a temporary hazardous condition and a permanent hazardous condition. If you have a temporary hazardous condition or defect, the plaintiff or claimant has the burden to prove that the county or its facilities manager knew or should have known about the defect and had time to remedy it. Now, that includes things like a broken pipe at the courthouse in January when it's 20 degrees below zero that spews water all the way across the parking lot and then turns to ice. If you don't get those little cones up instantaneously and someone decides that they're going to walk across it and slip and fall, the county is going to be liable. But the plaintiff has the burden to establish that you had not just knowledge that the ice was there, but adequate opportunity to resolve the condition. That's actually a big thing for us, because under the Governmental Immunity Act that everyone is familiar with, if you have a latent condition, you've got to prove, the burden is on the county to prove that they did not have a reasonable opportunity to discover the condition. And anytime the word reasonable pops up, it means that it's a jury question. So no matter what you do, you're going to end up either in mediation, arbitration, or a trial, because reasonable is just one of those words that you just hate to hear if you practice this particular law. So premises liability with respect to a permanent hazardous condition is where the county itself has created, constructed the hazard. Those are things like you put up a drainage system and you're directing it into the flower beds, and it rains really, really hard, and the water coming out of the drainage pipe pushes the pebbles that you've carefully put in this flower bed or decorative thing, and it pushes them out on the sidewalk, and then some unsuspecting citizen comes along, trips and falls on the gravel, and you have created a permanent hazardous condition. Or you put up a little ledge to keep the gravel in when the water comes out, and they come out carrying boxes or whatever, and they trip on the corner of that, that's a permanent hazard. Those are difficult, and they're extremely difficult to even discover that you have a hazard until somebody trips and falls. So that's the actual law surrounding premises liability, and it sounds pretty straightforward. But as I was telling Charlene, we have a lot of new judges right now in all of the districts, and they are not familiar at all with this law. The law of premises liability is a law. It's a legal issue as to whether or not you have knowledge or should have had knowledge of the hazard and an opportunity to remedy. So we should be able to file a motion, show that the plaintiff has not met their burden, and get dismissed. But inevitably, the judge says it's a jury issue. It's a factual issue, so the jury should work it out. But these are the types, I put some photographs, that's what the photographs are in here. And they're a little out of order from what I have in mind, so I'm going to try and go back. This first photograph, that actually is the fairgrounds case. It's this one here, this photograph. This is the fairgrounds case. It's called Cornwall. And that's a really interesting premises liability case. They had set up for this demolition derby a subcontractor, contractor with the fairgrounds, and the contract itself, as Johnny was telling you before, didn't really address whether who was going to be liable should that subcontractor not do the job that he should have been doing. And that's the one. You can see down there where there are all these people that are up against the railing, and they were standing on it. And they have the bales of hay right there in front of it. Well, these derby cars, they crash into each other. And a car came along, crashed into this car, forced it into the hay bale, which then slammed into those iron things. Slammed into those poles that they were standing on, and threw two men through the air to slam against the side, and they were seriously injured. And they sued the county. The contractor did the derby cars. They sued the county. And they said that the problem was that the county had failed to give adequate warning that this area was out of bounds. I mean, they had signs up, and they had a rope across it, and they had security guards there, but people had snuck through and gotten down there, and they said that was not sufficient to give them notice. So you can see how difficult it can be to comply with all the mandates. This is a very recent one. Miller, let me see if I have a picture of that. It's the one with the canopy set up. Yeah, it's the very next one. Yeah. This is a fair where they hired the BMX bike riders, and they had actually set up out in the parking lot because of the graded surface, or the asphalt surface, because that was best for the bikes. And you can see that there's, well, you can't see. Back here is their little arena, back here in this corner. And they had jumps and all that type of thing, and they were actually set up to work out of this large trailer. But it got hot, and their presenters, the young people on the bikes, decided that they needed some shade, so they put up this canopy. And as you can see, it's not secured to anything. The other presenters back in the background, their canopies were held down by big water and sand barrels. The EMT truck, they had secured their canopy with ropes and restraints to the fire truck. But this canopy was just sitting loose. And all of a sudden they had a big burst of wind, and it picked up that canopy and threw it across the parking lot. And of course hit an 80-year-old couple, and the gentleman was in a wheelchair. And the county got sued. Now in this particular instance, we had a little better luck with BMX bike riders, so I think we're going to probably do a little bit better. But those are the types of things you have to watch out for. You cannot, I mean, it's hard to even say how you can find out that somebody's going to erect a canopy that you don't even know about. This next one actually doesn't have a photograph, so you don't have to switch over, but well, we have the sidewalks. Everybody knows how difficult it is to maintain your sidewalks. Trees push up the slabs, and you are responsible for that elevation, especially if it's on your landowner property, not the sidewalks. You know, it's an entirely different issue if it's the sidewalks out in the city for the public's on, but if it's the sidewalks at the courthouse or at the fire station or at the county attorney's office, these are the ones that are going to be problematic. I had one case, it was in Tooele, and it was, this woman had gone to see her, I swear that the facts of the case is why we won. Her daughter had been arrested for drunk driving, and she was being out of jail. And it was snowing like crazy. Dan Pope was the weather expert that testified, and he said that he knew what the weather was better at the courthouse, I mean at the airport, than the gentleman that was measuring the snowfall right there in Tooele. And I thought, oh, thank you, you're not going to make you at all. So it had been snowing, and Mom came to see her daughter that was in the jail. And she got into the jail just fine, but while she's in there, it's snowing really hard, and she comes back out and walks across this, it's not really a sidewalk, but that kind of entire patio area between the sheriff's station and the jail. And she walks across that, slips and falls. And it's like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And I can't even remember what she did. She somehow severed the tendon, her Achilles tendon, and then she ended up having a permanent foot drop. And we took that case to trial, and as it turned out, they didn't like Dan Pope, saying that he was smarter than her and weatherman. And they decided there's also another issue in premises liability, that if your hazard, you can see and avoid that hazard, that you haven't been prevented from taking another way into the building, then you're expected to do that. So in her situation, there was an area where it was clear. She didn't have to walk through the snow. She chose to walk through the snow. So if it's open and obvious, and the county has created at least a space where you can walk, you're expected to walk there. But that's contributory negligence, and that gets into a whole different thing. But there are some saving graces in this. It's, you know, we do win a lot, but it's dangerous. So there's some photographs in here of the sidewalks that have gotten us into trouble. And you can see this first one, I can't even imagine that somebody even found that to trip on. But that little eroded edge caught this lady's toe and she went down hard. The very next one is that raised edge. Now it originally included there are some kind of interesting ways, instead of having, you can grind this down, which lasts for about 3 months until the tree grows a little bit more and pushes it up even higher. Or you can actually spray paint that a neon color, which seems to last a little bit longer, but certainly here it would last more than a season. Oh, I even included that. See the next picture? See how big that is? Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because we've got those trees by the sidewalks. Are you saying that spray paint color is a great protection to you, more so than grinding down your cement?
Well, grinding is an option, and the other option is to do this, is that neon color, especially out in the community. Grinding is going to be better on your own premises. That, there's a little bit more, and I can't say more liability, you're not more liable, but there's an expectation that you're going to see your own property, where there's a less expectation that you're going to see the sidewalk with the same defect down on Main Street. Unfortunately, the counties and the cities are responsible for this type of a defect, even out in the community.
What's the height requirement for that? I've heard it's like a half inch, quarter inch.
Well, we did a case a few years ago in Davis County, and the differential on that case was 1/4 of an inch. And we didn't go to trial, and we ended up winning that on summary judgment, but because she failed to file a proper notice of claim. So it's hard to say what level they're going to find a defect. Part of it was because not only was there a height differential, but it was also cracked and broken, and there was some debris.
I'm pretty sure the ADA book spells out that it's 1/4 of an inch and no higher. Is that
Well,
true?
and that's something that we rely on when a motion for summary judgment is filed or you go to trial. But if you know that there's a defect, if the plaintiff can establish that you knew or should have known that there was some kind of a defect, and there was plenty of opportunity to address it, and worse still, somebody had notified you of the defect, it's still a defect. It's a hazardous condition, whether it's 1/4 of an inch or 3/4
Quarter
of an
inch,
inch.
it's pretty small. I think we're gonna end up spray painting all of our cracks.
Well, but now, the 1/4 of an inch in that case wasn't like these photographs where the slabs were perfect and just raised 1/4 of an inch. It was also kind of eroded and broken up, but the height differential was that small. We didn't get to present that to a jury either to find out if they thought that that was a hazardous defect, because we wanted on the notice of claim issue. But it's just so that you're aware that they will complain about the slightest differential.
So in our county, we've got the ADA come out. They suggested all kinds of remedies. We paid $50,000 for remedies out of the county. And it turned out the first time that they tried to use the ramp area that they used, we had 2 lawsuits on every time. They were stepping off a step. It was spray painted. We also put markers, big, huge markers on the side. The problem was people come out reading their tax notices or whatever, and they'd walk up that last step. Every time, you could sit there and watch people do it and laugh, because it was kind of funny to see what some of them would do to catch it. But they didn't all fall. But we tried to remedy that as much as we could.
They definitely prove that if it can happen, it will happen, and they will sue. I'll jump, yeah.
So I'm a little confused on the painting thing. This is the first I've heard of it. So
Yeah.
painting it wouldn't that just say we know it's there? And then when they go out and they trip on it, they say, well, you knew it was there and you didn't fix it?
Well, it's kind of like putting out orange cones.
Yeah.
If you've got a hazard and you have put something out to warn them of the hazard, then you have shifted the burden to them to see and heed.
As a permanent fix, or are they looking for, is that as a short-term solution?
It's a short-term solution, but I mean, from season to season, if you have marked it, they have an obligation to see and heed that danger.
Great.
If they trip over it anyway, your liability is going to be much less than their liability for not seeing it and going around. And you only have to be, in civil cases, if you can establish that their negligence is 50% or greater than yours, then you're not liable. Or at least you don't have to pay them anything, which is the same thing.
What about colors on that? Our county, we painted the steps because we had so much issue with it. The steps were painted yellow, and they said, no, it's not yellow. We painted them red, it was not the color. We painted them blue, and then finally the guy who'd been painting them, he says, why don't you paint them black for the blind? Because no other color would cover it. So,
Well, I'm not advocating to blind that exclusively. You're gonna get somebody that's gonna trip over it if it's neon.
right.
In fact, skipping forward, there are a lot of cases where people fall down the stairs. I'll tell you, Box Elder County is plagued with people falling down the stairs in the old courthouse. There's this beautiful staircase. The first time I handled one of these cases at Box Elder in the old courthouse was back in like 1996. I've been doing this for a while. And this lady, John, said, I don't even know what she was there for now. That part was too long ago. But she went down these back stairs, and they were carpeted in a beige colored carpet, and have these beautiful mahogany or wood newel posts, and they had a brass rail that went all the way down, but only on one side. And it's a wide staircase, so of course she walked on the other side that didn't have a brass holder. And at the bottom of the stairs, there's kind of a little ramp, and then you turn and you step down on those half steps. That's where they fall.
There are pictures.
There it is. That is the third time that this occurred was just, I think 2 years ago. And by the time this most recent lady fell, they had put, these bright halogen lights above the stair. There was a sign, this sign down here was the one that was there before she fell. But in the carpeting itself, they had put in the carpet in red, step.
Like
$900.
Just
Not, but not watch your step. So apparently this was confusing. This lady came along and she still fell. And she still sued. And she said that it was because there was no sign at eye level. So now there is a sign at eye level. The point is, there's just no way to prevent somebody from not watching where they're going. The most amazing thing to me in that case was that when she came out of the permit office upstairs, she couldn't take the elevator. She had to walk past the elevator, walk all the way around that clock and down the stairs. But how she felt is beyond me. Let's see. So we talked about sidewalks. There's a picture in there of this little guy here. It's back, yeah. There's two of them. This was the claimant or the plaintiff in this particular case. This is down in Washington County. You can see he's kind of pointing downward. I didn't get any better photographs because what he was showing where this was all torn up. The county was building a senior center, and they had originally fenced it all off, but the old senior center was right next door. And so they were allowing the seniors to use these driveways that kind of dead-ended. And so the seniors would park in front of these driveways and use them as little bridges over the curb onto the sidewalk. And right along the edge of that driveway that they were using, it was all torn up. And he backed up and backed right off of that driveway. He actually stepped in a hole, which is what he's pointing at. He sued the county and the city for not fixing that before he stepped off it. We actually ended up winning that on summary judgment, but what the court found with respect to this was that the county and the city should never have allowed that. They were actually funneling people into that hazardous area by leaving this sidewalk in place, by leaving that little bridge thing in place.
So did they have the cones and the tape up when you drove off on the other tape up afterwards?
No, the cones were there, and he admitted to having the cones there. And in this particular case, the judge actually said that the plaintiff was not able to show at what point in time the governmental entity had any notice that there was a hazard, and certainly not enough notice in order to fix it. And we actually won based on the law. And then I actually told you about the Douglas case, which is sidewalks connecting buildings. That case where it's actually still going. That's the one where the pipe broke. It was a yard, those yard, what do you call them? Thank you. It was connected under about 5 feet underground, and it broke, it cracked. And the water column kind of bubbled up from the ground during the night and ran across the parking lot and froze. So when people started coming to work the next morning, they could see that there was ice there. And the facilities manager got out and put some, what do you call it? Those little orange disc things, and started cones, and started putting down ice melt. And this lady from across the street, who says that she could not see the ice, she walked over from a private clinic to get some postage. As she walked in on the south end of the building, and I don't know how many of you have ever been to Daggett County, but there was no ice down there. And it was just a straight shot from the clinic into the courthouse. But she walked out the front door, and her theory is that they should have prevented her from walking out the front door and walking across this ice, where she slipped and fell, and she actually broke one of the facets on her spine. So it's a pretty big case. So, I mean, you have to watch everything you do. Let's see. Oh, here's one of my favorites. This was in Wasatch County. This is bleachers. No, I don't have a picture of the bleachers. They had built these bleachers, or the high school had built the bleachers, and many years before, they were those collapsible portable kind. And in order to have them collapse, the stays that are required for permanent bleachers were at a different height that is required by code. And so they had opened up these bleachers at a public event, and the kids, of course, people would drop their children off at the football game. It was right in front of the high school. And they would drop their kids off at the football game and then just leave. And these little kids, really young, 6, 7, 8 years old, I mean, I don't even know if they were in school. They would climb up to the top of these bleachers, crawl underneath the support, and then jump off. And one of the little girls, she ended up being pushed off, and when she hit the ground, she broke both of her arms. So it was a pretty big case, and of course, they didn't just sue the high school, they sued the county because the county owned and stored the bleachers. So be careful about what you store and what you buy from others, because they do become your problem. Norris, this is a good case. This picture is in there too. It's the one that has the vault case. These things, these lids are incredibly heavy. And this governmental entity assumed that the weight of the lid would hold it in place. I mean, it has these little lips on the inside, so it couldn't really shift. But the problem is that people are now getting into these vaults to steal copper. So somebody had gotten into this vault. It had a bolt on 2 corners, and they had broken that to get into the vault to steal the copper that they thought was going to be there. This particular one was empty, so they came up empty. But they left the vault lid not secure. And so here comes Mrs. Citizen. This is kind of odd that she's walking her dog so that he can go to the bathroom, and I don't know how that equals walking on this vault lid. But she and the dog stepped up onto the vault lid, and it tilted and dropped her down in there. And she didn't get out. She also broke her back. It was a pretty bad accident. And we ended up mediating that case because in summary judgment, the judge actually issued an opinion that the governmental entity in this case did not comply with the law that requires those things to be secured. So it's always fun when we get those kind of judgments. Well, we already talked about the stairs and the different cases. The one thing about those stairs in Box Elder County is nobody actually ever continues on with the case. I mean, they just kind of quit. So it's somehow it's being blessed.
We have a green attorney.
This is true. Most of these cases on premises liability has been established because of the number of lawsuits against grocery stores for slipping and falling on debris that other shoppers have dropped on the floor. Not just the meals, but you know, when grocery stores set up and they give away free ice cream or any free substance, some patron or child is going to drop that ice cream cone down an aisle, and then another patron is going to come along and slip and fall on it. So that's how most of this premises liability law has come about. We are still, as you can see from the Jex versus JRA, that was a grocery store. A person slipped and fell on a puddle, and they called well, the plaintiff always tries to call it a permanent condition. The argument is that you created the situation that resulted in this defect, and therefore it's permanent. But the courts have now held that if it's an issue of maintenance, if the pipe broke, that's an issue of maintenance. The fact that you put in the pipe and then didn't dig it up every 20 days to make sure it didn't have a crack in it, does not constitute a permanent condition. So anything associated with maintenance is also considered to be a temporary condition and falls under that. But you have to have notice and an opportunity to remedy. The quote is, "A state of disrepair of premises is a temporary unsafe condition." That's it just ended. Here it is. The defendant did not create it and is responsible for it only in the context of maintenance. And so there are some other cases that also confirm that. Does anybody have any more questions? That didn't take very long.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
And it's somewhat related to that tin incident. I work for the county fair in Davis County. We, of course, get a lot of tents up every year. We rent most of our tents from Diamond Rental. They're all staked down very well. So here's my question. Diamond Rental, when they stake them down, of course, they use a 4-foot stake that sticks a foot out of the ground. All the way around the tent, there's stakes sticking up. Or they'll get a sheet of metal, a piece of metal down, and put 3 stakes in there, and now you've got a piece of metal with sharp edges around by every post all the way around that tent. I always go through and I paint them orange. And I don't ask Diamond Rental or anything, I just go paint their stuff orange. They've never got mad at me. Should I even be touching their stuff, or is the liability theirs, liability mine?
I think that when you have somebody that is a subcontractor or someone that you are paying to bring their act in, your liability is going to eventually fall on the county. So yes, I think that you should go around and inspect that they are complying. And I also think you should include it in their contract. And I know that usually the facility managers don't get an option in what goes in the contract. But, you know, the year before the fair, you might have an opportunity to put your input in. And if responsibility for making sure that their canopy or whatever it is that they're using has been secured, if it's in there, then they become liable. It's unlikely that will stop you from being sued.
Does the orange paint help?
You're the deep pocket. You're always going to get named. But it makes it a lot easier for you and get you back out of it.
Well, you know, of course they're doing that because we've lost those big tents up there at the fair years ago. We had a microburst on by. So now they really stake them down really good. And, but yet, you know, then you got stakes out there.
Yeah.
So when I go by and paint them orange, is that helping me just like if I paint the sidewalk hazard orange?
Yeah, you could paint them orange. How you go about doing these things, obviously I'm not qualified to comment about that. But anytime you, especially, you know, I'd have a whole fistful of neon paint cans. If you have created a situation where there's no way they could not see that, then you shift some of your burden onto them to observe. And everyone, every person that enters your property has a duty to see and heed the danger. They can't just blindly trip onto your property. The one thing is that Utah continues to hold status of entrance, trespassers, licensees, invitees. The problem is that with a governmental entity, everybody that visits you is a business either a business licensee or a business invitee. If they come on the property to get a permit and they have to pay for it, they're an invitee. If they come on the property for their own benefit, then they become a licensee. And there's a lot of difference in your liability depending on what that is. Yeah.
Falling snow, we have a flat roof at our justice court, and on top of the roof, there's an area about that big. And we had, I guess, wind came up and caught that snow and pushed it right onto the county attorney's truck below. Froze, and so now we have a claim. It's kind of an interesting situation that I have to try to defend with my attorney against my attorney. But
Job security.
there's really. there's-
Or not.
There's no way we would have known that.
That was taken care of, he's got problems.
Well, if that had caused a physical injury, that would have been your defense, is that there is no way you had to have had notice. That would be so fact intense though, whether or not you should have known. And that's where we get tripped up is, you may not have known, but should you have known? And that kind of depends on your situation there. I mean, you knew that the roof was flat. You knew that it was barricaded so it was going to pile up. I don't know, did you know that it was going to pile up and fall down on his car? Fortunately, that's workers' compensation, so.
More and more counties are using prisoners to do that. How much of a liability is that?
Yes, that's true. In fact, that case I was telling you about with the frozen parking lot, they were using the inmates to help shovel up that ice and put down snow melt.
I know that the state and the house prisoners and prisoners, they have insurance themselves. But I'm just wondering about the county liability, they'll pay you if you're on county premises doing this.
That raises a whole lot of issues other than premises liability that we can definitely get into, but that's a longer conversation.
I'm just wondering if it's prohibited.
Right now, those community service workers, as they refer to them in the statute, are not considered volunteers under the Governmental Volunteers Act, which would make them employees for purposes of liability and workers' comp. But there's regularly legislation that comes to try and change that because DOC doesn't like to pay those claims. They want whoever is actually getting the service from that person to have to pay that claim. So that's one that we just need to really watch because eventually it will become the county's responsibility that if they injure somebody while they're performing that duty, you're responsible for the liability. If they injure themselves while they're doing that, you're going to pay workers' comp benefits. So it's one to really watch and just oversight is really important with them because that's the case that we'll lose at the legislature with is, well, yeah, when the county has no responsibility for them, they don't have to pay a liability claim. They're not going to show them how to do the job right. They're just going to send them out there and have them do it. They have no risk, so they're not going to, we need to put the risk on them, then they'll control these guys.
Now, there are some cases where, for example, not that particular situation, but where an inmate or a prisoner has been put on furlough or sent on a, 2-day holiday for the weekend, or they can go to grandma's funeral, and they've injured somebody, and the county or state or whomever, the governmental entity is sued for the injury, and the courts have said that you have to know that they had the propensity to commit that particular act before they were released in order for the county or the governmental entity to be liable. So there is that protection. And if you tell the inmates what they're there for, whatever the situation may be, if they know what it is that they're going to be involved in, then they have to assume some responsibility for their own actions. But Johnny's right, it's very possible that they'll end up being workers' compensation injuries because you don't have to prove liability with workers' compensation. If you're injured, it is covered. And if they consider them to be employees, then they're going to be covered under your insurance.
First question, does signage do anything for us like that? They're going to enter use arena at your own risk?
Not that general. I mean, you can put it on, I mean, it's always a good idea, but it's too general. And the problem with the fair is that we charge them to get in.
Well, I mean, every day riding, you know, of course, they pay to go in, there.
Right, yes, well,
So that sign's not doing any good at all.
Well, it depends on what they're doing. For equine events, if they're coming in to use their horses,
Yeah.
there's a specific statute that tells you the exact language that has to be on the sign and the size of the lettering and stuff. And if you put that sign up, then you are immune from injuries that they have while riding their horses at your facility. But you
Yeah.
can't fake it. You
yeah,
have to
it's
use
gotta
the exact
comply
language in the
exactly.
statute.
I have a question about that. Do you have to know if that's the sign they used to horse council been selling?
Say that again?
I'd have to review it, but I would guess if they're selling something that they make sure it complies with the statute.
The question was if that's the sign the Utah Horse Council has been selling.
Oh, I don't know, I would have to look into that.
But you can pull up the statute and see what it is, and see what the wording is, because that's what we did.
Okay.
Yes.
Another one. This just happened yesterday, and it would have been something if I could have just brought a little sideshow of this on my cameras. Our server's been down since Friday, I think, when you know that. On and off, they keep losing the server, and I have no phones, but I have my computer. It's a DVR backup. It's all computerized. And I'm looking over at the building across from ours, and it's WIC, which is Women, Infants, and Children. These two little twins are 5-year-old little girls playing with one of our toy boxes, and we put them together about a year ago. And they were 68 pounds apiece. They're heavy duty, they sit on the ground. Well, they crawl over the top of them and that, and they usually are pretty good about, the parents getting them off there. Well, these two little girls are tipping it up, up so they can get underneath. And it went on for about at least 12 minutes on the camera. And I couldn't call the front desk because the phones were down. So I said, another maintenance guy to run over there real quick. It had tipped. They were crawling up, taking turns. And the bad thing about it is the parents were sitting there watching them do this. They had 3 other kids, so they had 5 kids altogether. If that would have fell, it would probably, at least her head was under there. It's like it was a game. If it would have fell, it would have broke her neck. Because it broke when it hit the ground. They did break it. It's 68 pounds. And they were like, they're twin little 5-year-old girls.
Yeah.
Would we have been liable? We would have, wouldn't we? Even when their parents were there watching it.
I would suspect that they would somehow implicate you. I don't think in the long run that it would stick, because in that particular instance, they were being watched by their parents. The parents don't get to shift their responsibilities onto you.
Excellent.
So if you can, especially if you were videotaping
Oh,
it,
yeah, everything.
and you had evidence of mom and dad sitting there watching them do that, nothing would have stuck to you.
And this kind of stuff happens a lot at that building. The kids, there's so many people coming for free services, and they have other kids, so they're pertaining to the small young ones, but it's always busy there.
Didn't you know you hired on as a babysitter?
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Proper measurement now for security,
Yeah.
So it's yeah.
Kind of on those same lines, if you have like some landscape, boulders, rocks, good size, kids love to play on those.
Well, they do.
Are those hazards?
Those are hazards of a permanent nature. And yes, they can be called hazards. Anything can be called a hazard. If you water, which of course you have to do, and that water drips off of the foliage and onto the sidewalk and gets a leaf really wet, you know how slippery leaves can be when you're stuck in the ground. Somebody comes along and slips and falls on that is a hazard. It's not a defect, but it's a hazard. And since you actually created that, but it ends up being a hazard of maintenance. Your rocks, if you let them play on them, become a hazard of a permanent nature. A sign would be really good there.
If it was designed for them to play on, that.
Oh, they were designed for them to play on. Well, what's down below if they slip?
No, I'm saying this is like a hypothetical.
Oh, no, wait. I was going to say, yeah.
Well, I was going to say, one thing you can do is put in those, instead of putting in actual rocks, put in those rubber rocks. That rubber stuff that you
Oh,
put
yeah.
on playgrounds.
Anytime they know, though, if these guys have seen this, they have to remedy that.
They do.
Or if they can be proved in court, then you're done. You're
Especially permanent
They got you.
hazards.
Right.
If you created the hazard, you're much more likely to be found liable than if it's a temporary hazard. So,
Big difference there will be the charge for them to play on that. Because under the Recreational Immunity Act, both for everyone, but for government especially, because you've got it in two different places, as long as you don't charge, somebody who's recreating on your property doesn't have a lawsuit against you.
or if it's $1 or less.
I'll tell you what I was really thinking here. I feel kind of silly bringing this up now because I'm afraid it was just a stupid idea, but we're gonna build a playground down at the Legacy Center, and whenever I take my kids somewhere, the rock is just as fun as the swing set. And so I wondered if, in addition to a playground, if you could have like a perimeter, and sometimes you see them as a parking lot barrier, a perimeter with rocks that, kind of act as maybe a double duty, they're perimeter and there's something the kid can play on.
Well, that is a little bit different issue because of the protections afforded to recreation areas. So you don't charge for them to go in there, you're protected. I mean, absolutely protected, if it's free, or if it's less than $1. However, if you have something, say you have a park, and in the park you put in a carousel, and the seating tiles in the carousel fall and hit somebody, those are actually going to be considered a temporary hazard, even though it's in a recreation center. So each one is going to be an individual case, but the things that you can prevent, and it's a long list, if you know about it and you think it's a hazard, then it's going to be considered a defect. So.
Another thing, then I hate to keep adding to this thing, but the risk management team should be going around in all counties and looking at the things that are like that and remedying them. And so when you get a situation like this, like kids or like what other things we discussed, risk management needs to go over those things.
They should, but that's so much more official. In our day-to-day, when you're walking to and from work or from the parking lot into the building, if you see things that should be addressed, bring them to somebody's attention. Because if someone knows about it, that knowledge can be imputed to the county. So it's important that if you see something you think is a hazard, tell somebody, so that they can address it. Anything else? Thank you.